The Joy First model basically means that you are thinking about building community 80% of the time and responding to behaviors 20% of the time. Hi, teacher friends, and welcome to That's Just Good Teaching with me, Deanna Smith, where we talk about practical, A-bar, and culture-responsive teaching tips that are actually just good teaching. Today, we are going to be talking about creating a classroom culture that is rooted in joy and inclusion and a place that feels good for students and teachers to be. Let's jump in. All right, teacher friends. So the first thing that you can do to make sure that your classroom culture is rooted in joy and joyful and inclusive is to think about the Joy First model. Now, the Joy First model is something that I talk about in my trainings, in my courses, in my professional developments. So if you want the in-depth version of the Joy First model, you're definitely going to want to look into those options. Of course, there will be links in the description box below. But the Joy First model basically means that you are thinking about building community 80% of the time and responding to behaviors 20% of the time. Now, you might hear that and say, but Deanna, my kids are exhibiting these behaviors all of the time, so I can't be responding 20% of the time. But let me tell you this. If you flip this and you think about building that community as the number one priority, 80% of the time, questioning, how can I build community? How can I build community? How can I build community? Instead of, how can I get the students to behave? How can I get the students to do this? How can I get the students to do that? You will see that those behaviors are actually coming up less frequently. And this is designed for even the toughest of classrooms. Y'all, if you aren't familiar with my personal history and my story, I have not taught in easy classrooms. I've had all of the demographics that are supposed to be hard or challenging, that language that I don't like to use because I think it is deficit language, but things like inner city schools, urban schools, low SES, all of that, that is where this method actually came from. So I know for a fact it will work in even the toughest of classrooms because it taps in to the need that we all have to feel like we belong and to feel a sense of community. So the Joy First model basically just means that you are spending a good chunk of time thinking about how you're going to continue to build community with your students and spend less time playing what I call whack-a-mole, which is just responding to behaviors crazy like a chicken without a head. So if you want to learn more about just all of the details, I have a ton of free resources here. I have a newsletter. I have an Instagram. I wrote a book. There's a million ways that you can find out more, but just know that the Joy First model and flipping it and spending more time building your community and less time just responding to behaviors is going to totally transform your classroom community. All right, teacher friends. So the next tip that I always encourage folks to do is to shift your mindset. Now, this might seem kind of like, what does this have to do with anything? But hear me out. When you shift your mindset to think about joy and participating in the fun parts of school as something that students have a right to instead of something that students earn, you will totally transform your classroom culture. For a long time, and I'm including myself in this because I was definitely one of these people, I would use things that were happening in our community as an incentive. I would use recess as an incentive. I would use if you don't do this, then you're not going to be able to participate in the community meeting or the assembly or the holiday party, whatever it is that we were doing. And I shifted that thinking and I had to change my mindset because I realized what I was doing is I was rewarding my students with something that they actually already had a right to. Because all of our kids have a right to and deserve to feel good and joyful at school. And they deserve to and have a right to be a part of these communities. Even when they have a hard time figuring out how to be a part of the community, the goal is still to have them in the community. And what I mean by that is it's not like every kid is going to know automatically how to be in community respectfully. And sometimes being in community means that they are, unfortunately pushing past others' boundaries or, hurting other people. That's where the learning comes in. We have to teach them how to be in that community. But at the end of the day, we want them to be in the community. So mindset shift that I encourage you to just kind of reflect on, marinate on, think about it a little bit, is that joy is something that our students have a right to in school. They deserve to feel joyful, and included at school. And so we don't want to use joy as like a carrot or like an incentive or a reward, because they should really be having that anyway. So unless your student is really having some challenges where they're like a danger to themselves or others, I always encourage teachers to include all of your students in the joyful activities that make school so much fun and such a meaningful and wonderful place. So that is your second tip. Joy is not a privilege, it is a right. All right, teacher friends. So we have talked about joy, and joy is something that is fun and feels like kind of spontaneous and exciting, but you actually need to think about joy as a habit. And what I mean by that is joy can definitely get lost in the sauce that is the year and just kind of the thousands of things that we're doing and the busyness and the hustle and bustle. And so I encourage folks to see joy as a habit that they need to build into their schedule, almost something that they need to check off of their checklist or their to-do list to make sure that it's actually happening. Because the reality is, if you don't schedule it, you might just forget about it because you have a million other things going on. Standardized testing, math scores, ELA scores, all of this stuff happening. So make sure that you schedule and joy. What does that look like? Think about, how can you experience joy with your students every day? And I say with your students, that doesn't mean just like they're doing something fun. Like, I want you to be incorporated in it as well. So that's a daily piece, weekly piece, and monthly piece, and then yearly piece. So the joy on a day-to-day basis could be something quick, a quick little fun game, something that you guys are all doing together, something that makes you laugh. The weekly thing can be a little bit more, a little bit more production. Maybe it's like a weekly, community celebration or something like that. The monthly thing, I like to incorporate this, and that the joy is based around whatever heritage month that we're experiencing. So maybe it's a special, event or an assembly or a play or a production, something that ties all of that together as well. Because of course, we're rooting for our classroom communities to be culturally responsive. Y'all know that's also at the root of everything that I do. So that's a fun way to overlap it there. And then yearly, I want something big. I'm talking like field day, dances, Saturday events, something big and fun. And this is not necessarily on you as just a classroom teacher to plan, but something that your entire school should be thinking about. A big celebration of joy that just kind of commemorates the year. So when you look at your calendar and when you look at your planning, whatever scope and sequence that you're using, the last question, or maybe the first question, or somewhere along the way while you're like plugging in, here's where this is gonna go, here's where that's gonna go, plug in some joy into that calendar as well. That way that you can make sure that joy is happening on a daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly basis for your students and for you as well. All right, teacher friends. So the last tip, and maybe one that some people are going to struggle with, but it might be the most important, is finding joy outside of school. Yes, you are not going to be able to show up as a joyful, authentic, and full version of yourself if you aren't finding joy in your own personal life. I once worked with a teacher who, looked at their testing data, and between one semester, he didn't change that much, but something that he did change was in the first semester, he was going and just doing a lot of things outside and going to a lot of events. And he was a music buff, so he was going to like live music a lot. And we noticed that his scores were actually stronger for his classroom. The numbers were better in the survey in his classroom on the semester where he was like more active socially. And I think for some people, they would think like, well, if you're doing all this stuff, like that's less time that you're spending lesson planning, that's less focus. And that was just totally not the case, because he was so filled up personally and he was in such a good place just as a human. He was able to show up in a way that was like really authentic and really meaningful for his students. So the last tip, and very important, is to find some joy in your outside life. If you're anything like me, being in the school just brings you joy. The kids are hilarious. Whenever I needed a laugh, I would go talk to the sassy middle schoolers, or I would go hang out with the kinders. And so you can get a lot of joy from school, and you probably get a lot of joy, I hope at least, from your colleagues. Those funny little check-ins in the morning, conversations in the hallway, or conversations in the staff lounge. But it's really important to find your joy outside of school because, as I always say, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So make sure that you're finding things that bring you joy outside of school, and that way you can bring that joy into the building. This past summer, I created the Summer of Joy Challenge with my followers over on Instagram, and we were just sharing things that brought us joy all summer as a way of saying like, hey, we are teachers. We deserve this time of rest. We deserve this time of joy over the summer to just kind of replenish ourselves. And it was such a fun way to kind of kick off the year with thinking about like things that brought us joy. And so I encourage you to keep that same energy and bring it into the school year. And when you start to find that joy for yourself, you will be surprised how you will show up even better for your students. Well, that's all I have for you today, teacher friends. This was 4 tips that you can use to make sure that your classroom culture is rooted in joy this year. I guarantee it. If you root your classroom culture in joy, if you're thinking about inclusion, if you're thinking about belonging, this is going to be your very best year yet. So just a quick review. We talked about joy first as a model. We talked about shifting your perspective, that joy is a right and not a privilege. We talked about making joy a habit, and we talked about finding some personal joy in your own personal life as well. Now, I talk a lot about joy. I wrote a book all about it called Rooted in Joy, which I think if you're watching this should be available right now. So there will be a link in the description box if you're excited to learn more about bringing joy into your classroom. But also, folks, just remember that a joyful and inclusive classroom is healthy for your students and also for you. It's going to make you feel good as well. If you want more tips, make sure that you are subscribed. Follow me on Instagram, buy the book, all of the things to stay tapped into this community. And thank you so much for watching.